All right, guys, our guest today is someone who needs little introduction. He is a serial entrepreneur with experience including wireless networking, military research, Hollywood film production, and award-winning and life-saving medical simulation. Today, he is a leading authority in behavioural change dynamics. He has created and consulted on some of the most effective, transformative, and highly rated educational products and live events in the world. Widely recognized as one of the most powerful, engaging, and entertaining speakers in the world today, he has shared the stage with Sir Richard Branson, Jack Canfield, John Gray, Robin Sharma, President Bill Clinton, and much more. His dedication and passion for improving the quality of human lives all across the world was an inspiration behind his flagship program, WILDFIT, globally recognized as the most effective health transformation program on the market. His program is Mindvalley's single most popular and acclaimed body transformation curriculum, with over 500,000 students enrolled across the world. So with that, I'd love to welcome in and thank you for your time, Eric Edmeades.
Hey guys, thanks so much for having me. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, definitely. No, Les, and I really appreciate you joining us today. And yeah, it's going to be fun indeed. And, Les has read out what I guess could be called some cliff notes for your life so far. But what we'd really love, Eric, is if you could tell us about your origin story, as far back as you'd like to go, really what's shaped you to bring you to where you are today. We'd love to hear it.
I think the short version was I was born in South Africa, and my parents decided, South Africa, 1970, and they just weren't really a big fan of the regime at the time. And so we immigrated to Canada when I was very small. So I grew up around a bunch of people who knew how to skate, and I didn't. So it was the immigrant life. And then I went through some of the typical childhood things, alcoholism, divorce, and living with parents on different sides of the country. And if you live in England and your parents live on different sides of the country, it's like a 2-hour drive. When you live in Canada and your parents live on different sides of the country, it's like a 5-day drive. It's a different lifestyle. In my teens, I went through some real challenging times. In fact, briefly, at the age of 15, I was actually homeless and kind of had to navigate my way through life and finish that year of school under my own steam and my own power, which is nothing that I would ever want any of my children to go through. But I'm incredibly glad I went through it in the typical irony of parenting, right? Like, no, I don't want you to experience all the pain and spiritual growth I went through because it was too much, but I'm glad it happened to me. And then I left school, when school was finished, I went right into the workforce, and I was always very interested in sales, marketing, results, entrepreneurship, and that kind of stuff. And I started my first business in the data capture field, selling mobile computing equipment, wireless networking, that sort of thing. And that was actually in England, funny enough. And I grew that business for 9 years. And then I sold that business, and I spent 2 years traveling around the world, in the stereotypical looking for myself. And I looked for myself in Bali and Thailand and Korea and Singapore. And I found a little bit of me in all of those places. And then I jumped back into business when I got involved in movie production and that kind of stuff. It was really fun. But where I really found my stride, where I really found myself was when I got involved in education. I started teaching business through businessfreedom.com. And then, I'd had this a hobby that started in my early 20s around nutrition and nutritional psychology. So in about 2012, I just started devoting my energy toward education and inspiration. And that's really what I've been working on ever since. That's the creation of WILDFIT. And that's kind of what's led me to be here with you now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Eric. And, for those who may, have heard of you or known of your work, they certainly know that there's much more to your story than that. But, let's dive into a few threads and, tease a little bit out and see, what we can sort of find or speak about. So you bring up a nice pivotal moment about your childhood or that brief period of homelessness at 15. I want to ask you, mate, how did you come to that situation for yourself. And, you know, and it's interesting that you say, and I've never really thought about this myself, but it got me thinking in terms of, I guess, traumatic experiences, or, you know, that type of thing that can cause or be a catalytic, you know, a moment in one's life, but then not wanting one's, you know, loved ones to experience the same. So I want to ask you about that experience, and, you know, what I guess led you to that point, and what could you, I guess, what do you feel the foundation of going through something like that at such a young age gave you, you know, to make you who you are today?
You know, I think one of the things I believe is that I believe that we are, as a population, suffering with more emotional strife than any generation before us. We have suicide rates are going up, and I think I read the other day that something like 16% of Americans are on antidepressant or anti-anxiety drugs. 1 in 6 children are on those drugs in school at the moment. You know, and I find that fascinating, because we live in the safest, easiest, most technologically advanced, you know, time ever. Like, yeah, I was reading the other day that a British merchant ship could carry, I think they said 165,000 tons in a year, and required, you know, over the course of the year, required 22,000 people to be involved in all that. And today we have a single ship. That's the entire British, that's the entire British merchant navy, 22,000 sailors and 164,000 tons of transport in a year, or something like that. And we now have single ships that transport more than that with only 22 people. Can you imagine the difference with something like the COVID-19 lockdown if we needed 22,000 people to transport that food? We live in the safest, most protected, best times in the history of ever, and yet suicide rates are climbing. Think about what that means. It means more people are saying this game isn't worth playing, yet it's easier now than it's ever been. And so I actually think that part of the problem is it's too easy. It's just gotten too easy. And you know, one of the ways I like to compare this is that if I am 50 now, and I was born in 1970, but if I instead was born in, say, 1900, then by the time I was 20 years old, I will have gone through World War I and the Spanish flu, which infected fully 1 in 3 people across the planet. You know, it was a pretty serious situation. Then, you know, then I'm 20, right? But okay, so I start working my way through the 20s, but then the Great Depression comes along, and I got to make my way through the Great Depression. And then just as I'm picking up my socks, coming out the Great Depression, World War II begins. And now I'm 44 years old. My life has been entirely strife. And then wait a second now, just as I'm settling in after World War II is finished, the Cold War is starting to heat up. The Cuban Missile Crisis happened. I mean, and you know, what's really funny is if you talk to people that have lived through that generation, they're some of the most laid back, cool, wise, like, and I think one of the problems we have is it's just too damn easy. So what happened to me? You know, I went through a tough childhood, you know, the typical stuff. And as a result, I was a tough child. So I was not the easiest child to parent. And so, and my parents had split up, and my mom and I had a big fight, and that led for me to go live with my dad for a while. My dad was like 2 years sober. And by the way, like when you're 2 years sober, you're basically like 2 years being an adult. You know, it's you know, and so what kind of father are you at 2 years sober? Not so aware. And so next thing you know, I'm off to boarding school, and a boarding school that in retrospect, I'm very grateful for, but also arrived at the end of. And one day I decided I refused to go back, and my dad refused me to take me into his house. And I don't know why I didn't just run off back to Halifax to go live with my mom, maybe pride, whatever. But bottom line is I found myself on the streets in Edmonton, Alberta. But I'll tell you something, it only hit me last year. I was on a podcast talking about this exact thing, and it hit me during the podcast. It was like, well, it was Edmonton, Alberta. Now, I don't know if you appreciate cold until you've been to Edmonton, Alberta. Like in the wintertime, the headline will at least once a winter say -40, no matter how you look at it. And the reason they'll say that is that -40 is the same in Fahrenheit and in Celsius. It's cold. And that's just kind of normal. And it dawned on me that had I been homeless in the summertime, I probably would have just found a park bench to sleep on. I would have found a park I could crash out in for a while. And then within a few days, I would have started looking and smelling like a homeless person. And then people would have handed me money on the streets. And the next thing you know, I'd have been an actual homeless person rather than a smart kid who happened to be homeless. And because it was 25 or 30, I didn't have that as an option. And so I had to find other solutions. Because life was difficult, I was forced to find better solutions. And those better solutions included couch surfing, until I'd used up those relationships. And then all of a sudden, I remember one day walking, and we all used to hang out at this video arcade. You guys are a bit young for this, but there was a time when we walked up to video games and put money in them. We put money in the video games, and then we played right then. And we hung out at these arcades, right? And I noticed that the owner, he always looked like so tired. He just always, I walked up to him. Think about this. I'm 15 and I look 12. And I walk up to him and I go, man, you look tired. It's like, but why are you saying this to me? And I said, well, because I have a solution. And he said, what? And I said, you're tired because you're here opening the place at 9 a.m. and you're closing it at 3 a.m. And it's like, why don't you let me open it for you at 9? And he goes, I'm not hiring. I go, no, I'm not looking for a job. If you just let me sleep here on the couch at night, I'll open the place for you in the morning, run it till about noon, then you can stroll in at noon. And then you can leave at a reasonable time in the evening, have dinner with your family, and I'll take care of the place at night. You don't even have to pay me. I said, if you bought me some food every now and again, that might be good. And he did. He didn't care about violating all the child labor laws, and he got the deal with me. And so next thing you know, I was off the streets, and I negotiated a deal. And what I'm really trying to get at is that had it been any easier, I might not have done that.
Yeah.
Because it was hard, I had to.
Yeah. I think, look, there's a few threads and a few little principles that I'm picking up here. And I didn't want to dive into this quite as soon as in this conversation, but hey, like we're flowing, right? So, I know that you have a close affinity to, the African people, and you just recently came back, I believe, from visiting the hunter-gatherer tribe that you have been for the last 10 years or so, right? And I think that, that in itself tells me a little bit more, or it helps me connect the dots about what you're saying there, right? In terms of, the sense of ease. Like, I feel that you probably go back there to in essence, like humble yourself in a little way, right? To really see what the traditional way of living is like. And then what we can learn from a, anthropological standpoint as well, right? That is something that I personally am quite fascinated in myself. I've one of my favorite books in the last couple of years that I've read was, Primitive Man as Philosopher by Paul Radin. And, it talks about some, really profound things that we as modern people have, somewhat forgotten, in terms of this tactile, sensory, workmanship and craftsmanship and the artisanship of, life essentially, right? I'm also a big proponent of Zen Buddhism, and they just teach that, a day without work is a day without nourishment. So I'd love for you to dive into this, this connection that you have with the hunter-gatherer people that you visit each year, and what have you learned so far, and even reflecting on your very most recent trip, what do you take away from those visits?
So my grandfather found a skull. He was an archaeologist, and he found this skull, and they dated it, and it was 259,000 years old. And I remember holding a cast of this skull in my hand when I was about 12, and looking at it, and it has these 2 bite marks in the top. And the bite marks are consistent with either a leopard or hyena for size. It's hard to tell, but it's probably, but if it was a leopard, it was probably cause of death. If it was a hyena, it might've been cause of death or, scavenging. We just don't know. And at 12, I was fascinated by that question. I wish I knew. I wish I knew what this guy's life was like. What was his life like? What was it like living on the African savannah? And considering that your DNA and mine, you say I have a close affinity with the African people. Well, I think we're all African people. We just are African people that left. And so, I've contemplated a lot what that guy's life would be like. And so many years ago, I used to run these leadership programs where I would take people, corporate teams or high performers, and I would take them up Kilimanjaro as part of a mental toughness training that I used to do. Leadership and communication and stuff. And I came down the mountain one year, and my logistics partner, had Googled me and knew that I was interested in this, anthropology and this kind of stuff, and said, there are traditional hunter-gatherer Bushmen that live here in Tanzania. Do you want to meet them? And I'm like, I had no idea. I knew there was a small tribe in Southwest Africa, Namibia, the Kung Bushmen, but I didn't know there was, and so I was like, yeah, I'd love to. And we grabbed jeeps and machetes and headed deep into the bush and went looking for them. And eventually we stumbled upon a family of the Hadza people, who are a nomadic hunter-gatherer clan. And I've now been visiting them for, as you said, about 10 years. And I have seen all kinds of things, but they have helped me develop a theory that I've developed called the evolution gap. And the evolution gap is, as I define it, is a gap that began opening up between our genetic evolution and our environmental change, the changes in our social structures, in our technology, in our civilization. Traditionally, genetics are incredibly slow. As a matter of fact, here's a great example. The cheetah, you probably are familiar with the cheetah, can do 0 to 100 kilometers an hour faster, or 60 miles an hour faster than just about any production car in the world. They're incredible animals. But if you look at their dots are very different than a leopard's. Their dots are round, very small and round. A leopard has these rosette patterns, the different dots for different purpose. But there's one recessive gene in the cheetah that can produce something called the king cheetah. And this is where all the dots are connected. They're splotched. And the cheetah looks much bigger and darker. It's the same animal. It just looks bigger and darker. But you will almost never find that gene occurring in nature today. And that's because Africa is now so full of grasslands and savanna that the splotchy dark pattern doesn't work. But as the polar ice caps melt and Africa repopulates with water, then the grasslands will shrink and the forests will come back over thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And then that recessive gene will become interesting again, because the dark splotchy patterns will work better in thick bush than they do in open savanna. But you see, that process will take hundreds of thousands of years. They will slowly select that gene over thousands and thousands of years. What we started doing about 30,000 years ago is changing our environment faster than our genetics could keep up with. And that gap is what we call the evolution gap. And so when you ask, like, what have I learned from them? One of the biggest reasons I've been visiting them is I have noticed some interesting things about them. First of all, they're happy. Like, I'm not saying they're cheerful. That's a different thing. Cheerful and happy is not the same thing, but they're contented. They're happy. I asked them, why don't they go live in the villages? They could. Why don't they go stay at the mission? The missionaries offer them free food. Why don't they do that? And they go, you know what? Sometimes we get tempted. Sometimes we get tempted. The free food is a very nice idea, but then we get there and now we have to listen to their idea about God, and they want us to clean the dishes. And then they tell us we can't live this way and we have to live this way. And we realize that the cost of the free food is just too high. And we go back to the bush where we live the way we want. And so on this last trip, I saw something I'd seen before, but I saw it clearly, really clearly for the first time. And what happened was I had taken some friends with me on the trip. I had taken Dr. Paul Saladino, who's the Carnivore Code author, and I'd taken Dr. Anthony Gustin, I think is his last name, and from Perfect Keto, and just some interesting guys that came along. One of the founders of Zumba. It was a neat group, and we went off, and we went hunting. And they were hunting baboons, which is their second favorite prey. They killed one baboon, which is not an easy thing to watch, I can tell you. And then they asked us to sit with the baboon while they went and chased and tried to get more. And they want us to sit with the baboon, of course, because you can't just leave it there because the hyenas will come and take it, right? So, but anyway, we're there, and I just go down into the riverbed to pee, and then Nona, the chief, he comes running past me, and he's like, tells me to go, go, go. And I end up going, like, I have to run with him, and I'm hunting. And then now he wants me to join the hunting group with them. We've already done 25 kilometers that day. And this is African kilometers with thorn trees and rocks and all this kind of stuff. And I'm running along at like total pace. And I'm suddenly like, wait a minute now. Normally when I go hunting with them, the guides are behind me. So if I get lost, if I get lost this time, I won't be on your podcast. Like, I don't know how I'm stuck in the middle of nowhere. And so suddenly I realized, like, you go to the gym and you work out, but if you go with a trainer, you work out more. I suddenly realized I am working out now past what any trainer could get me to do, because my life is actually on the line. Mm. And I end up in this deep meditative state, running through the bush and thorn trees grabbing at me, making attempts for my face, like just like serious bush. And And then I look at these guys and they're loving it. They love it. They have such a passion for it. They love it. They have so much passion for hunting. They have as much passion for hunting as Steve Jobs had for simplicity, or as Elon Musk has for populating Mars. That's how much passion they have. And if we can find that passion for our stuff, if we can take the passion they have for hunting and apply it for our stuff, we can change the world. We see people doing it around us, right? But I see them, and then I notice something else about them, and that is that I've now been visiting them for 10 years. They are hedonists. They just chase pleasure. But the difference is that their reward systems, their pleasure systems, are a match for their environment. You see, when they go hunting, they get pleasure. When they catch something, they get pleasure. When they find honey, they get pleasure. When they eat fruit, they get pleasure. When they dig up a root vegetable, they get pleasure. Everything they do triggers dopamine, and everything they do is meant to trigger dopamine because it's moving them closer to survival. But now we live in a world where our dopamine is being stolen from us by social media companies, drug companies, food companies, media companies like the news, CNN, Fox, and these guys are all taking advantage of our reward systems to trigger fear or other positive emotions in us in order to manipulate our behavior. And again, here we have the evolution gap. So what did I see? I saw that for the Hadza, it is perfectly okay for them to be hedonists. It's okay for them to chase pleasure all day long because their reward systems are a match for their environment. But if we do that, then we die the most painful and expensive and socially devastating deaths on earth, from cancer and heart disease. Then we will need to take antidepressants on a regular basis. We'll need anti-anxiety treatments and all this other stuff. Because if we chase all the pleasures that are available to us without thought to the consequence, we're going to be in trouble. Oh, and by the way, if we look around, that's exactly what's happening to us.
Yeah, totally.
It's the matching of the environment. It's really interesting because I never thought about that. Because when you initially said, the hedonists, the hedonistic, straight away your mind goes to all these different things that you associate with that word, right? And then you go on to talk about how when they find honey and when they dig up a root vegetable and the hunt, right? And it's hunt because it's bringing them closer to survival. It's completely different. And
their reward systems evolved to help them survive their environment. And guess what? We have the same reward system as them.
Yeah, I think that's the difference, right? There's no real, I guess, need for survival with the way that we're approaching, our hedonistic ways, right?
Yeah, yeah. We chase and are lured with pleasure that has nothing to do with our survival and is in fact incredibly damaging. And so I am proposing a new thought process. And the new thought process is something that we refer to as conscious hedonism. And what that means is that you do chase pleasure, but you chase it with an eye on the consequence. And by the way, consequence is a tough word because the original meaning of the word consequence meant the short-term, the short-term results of your behavior, your actions, like what happens shortly after you do something, the immediate consequence. But the challenge is for most of us now, it's not the immediate consequence that's the problem. I mean, sure, you scarf down a disgusting pizza, and there are good pizzas out there, but say you just, trans fats and processed meats and ridiculous cheese and all this stuff, and you drink that down with a couple of beers. Sure, the short-term consequences are you feel groggy and shitty the next day. But the long-term consequences are you're walking down the sidewalk at 52 years old and you feel a tightening in your chest. And then you pass out and you're on the floor and the next thing you're in an ambulance. But you see, if we can't see that consequence while we're eating the pizza. Mm-hmm. If you could, we might make better decisions.
I don't think you'd be eating pizza or regularly
at least not
anyway.
That one.
Yeah,
no.
Not that one.
Yeah.
This concept of consequences and thinking about them is super interesting. It's something that we've touched on before and that Les and I talk about quite a bit. I think also there's this association with the word consequence that a consequence is a bad thing, right? So you do something and you got to think about the consequences because it might go wrong for you. But then there's also really good consequences to certain actions that we take. And it sounds to me like what you're talking about, conscious hedonism, is there can be good consequences, or you are talking about those good consequences of chasing the right sorts of pleasures. Would that be fair to say? Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, what I'm saying is that, you know, one of the principles in conscious hedonism is having a full spectrum awareness of the consequences that you're dealing with. So, for example, you know, you want to go out drinking with your friends. Okay, so what are the consequences of that? Well, the definite consequences of that are that tomorrow I'm probably not going to have the amount of energy that I have, you know, that I might have had, because even if I don't get fully hungover, I'm going to be flagging a little, right? That's just this short-term consequence. But then what we have to do is we need to be honest about the fact that any behavior that we do today is probably behavior repeating with some regularity. So it's not just the consequence of tonight's drinking, it's the consequence of drinking every weekend. What is that consequence? Well, that consequence might be that I'm gaining weight, that I'm putting stress on my heart, that I'm becoming a jerk, and I'm becoming socially irresponsible, that I might lose my family. Like you kind of have to go out to the potential rock bottom to really be honest about what the long-term consequences of your behavior are. Same thing with everybody thinks that they eat junk food as an exception, but the truth is they eat junk food because they had a really shitty day at work, and then they eat junk food because they had a really great day at work. Then they eat junk food because their friend's dog had a birthday. Like, there's always a reason for it, right? And in that moment, the consequence of eating it is, I feel a little tired in half an hour. What's the harm in that? But that's not the consequence to focus on. The consequence to focus on is the cumulative consequences over time of the consistent, repetitive engagement in that behavior. And the more we can bring that focus, the more we can take a look at that consequence, the more conscious we can be about what pleasure we chase. Yes, chase pleasure, but always consider the cost of the pleasure you're chasing.
I love the way that you're saying that we're bringing it into consciousness, because I think that half the problem is, we don't look as far as, past the next day, if that, right, for the most part, with regards to those types of choices. And, a lot of the time that's probably due to the fact that, there's a plethora of stimulus and busyness and whatever else that, crowds our minds in the busy modern world, right? That we're too busy to even think that far ahead about what we're actually doing. And half the time we don't even know that we're, eating a pizza that's going to be bad for us, as we're putting it in our mouths. Do you know what I mean? So it's great to just, it's more like just really just taking a step back and really assessing at a higher level what it is that you're doing and what are the long-term ramifications, right, of what it is that you are doing to yourself and your lifestyle. And it is more of the lifestyle choice, right? And I think that's the difference between, I guess, some or a lot of the programs out there that are about short-term fixes and 5-week diets and weight loss plans and all these sorts of things. They're very short-sighted, and they're hitting those I guess those short-term reward centers that we're now so used to having because of the instantaneous manner that the world sort of operates on. So I love that view of it. And I guess there might be a little bit of tongue in cheek in terms of like the use of the word hedonism as a more of a more neutral sense of the word rather than some sort of negative thing.
I think that's part of it, is that really good natural hedonism is I chase the pleasure that steers me towards success and happiness, because that's how. But then as we were enticed by the opportunity to chase pleasure that was separate from our survival or even detrimental to our survival, then hedonism became a different thing. And that's why I'm really focused on this concept of conscious hedonism. I mean, look, as far as I can tell, we get this one life. But look, we can argue about whether there's reincarnation or other lives or lives between lives and all that kind of stuff. But whatever the game is, whether we are living in some, purely science evolution thing, or whether God created it, or whether we're living in a sim created by some 13-year-old acne-filled kid from 2027, whatever we're living in, it appears the rules are that we only get to be conscious of the time we're in now. We only get to be conscious of this life. And one thing that's really clear to me about that is it's our responsibility to enjoy it as much as possible. And so that means that we should be chasing pleasure. But the trick of this game is that there are a bunch of traps around, and the traps feel good. That's the problem. The traps feel good. And what we have to do is figure out a way to navigate our way through those traps and not go for the cheap feel-good traps that have the long-term consequence. And I think, you know, again, let's take a look. We're in this situation right now where I asked the Hadza chief some years ago. I asked him if they do depression. You know, like, do you guys have depression? He didn't understand the word, so I had to rephrase it as, do you have long-term sadness? You know, can somebody be very, very, very sad for many, many days in a row? And he said, no. You can be sad for a day or two, maybe 3, but then you got to get over it. You know, you just got to get over it. And as he and I dug deeper into that conversation, you know, basically the message I got from him is that when you're really sad, you have low energy. And when you have low energy, you're not a very good hunter or gatherer. And so you're not going to be able to contribute very well to your own survival or the survival of your offspring or the people around you. And so if you spent a long time in sadness, you would die. Like, it would be bad. And so it's just not part of their culture to do that. And I think we now have a culture where, frankly, there's a huge amount of secondary gain for being sad and for being a victim and what have you. And listen, I'm not saying people don't go through hard things. I'm not saying that at all. I get that. It's just that, look, here's a crazy example. But if you're in a car accident, somebody shunts you from behind. Now you've got the neck collar on because you got the whiplash. And then you're like, you know what? I don't think it's hurting so much anymore. So you go meet your lawyer, because you got to have a lawyer to get your damages. And you show up without your neck collar. And your lawyer's like, dude, you're going to have to put that neck collar back on. You need to look like a victim, because our culture rewards us for looking like victims all the time. It's like, the harder we can make life look, the more sympathy we will get from people.
I've noticed that recently, and it's really interesting. I'd love to get you to talk a bit more on that, because it seems to be now people are trying to get prizes for having the saddest story. You know, who can be the biggest victim, which is a very stark contrast to, you know, decades ago, where it was who can achieve the most, who can be the biggest, the baddest, the fastest, the strongest. Right now, it's like, who can be the weakest, you know, how can I get this attention? And do you think that's because of the environment?
Yeah, I'll tell you where part of it starts. It starts because, think of it this way. We're all 10. Okay, we're all 10 and we're in school, and we've been given this assignment, right? And the assignment is to put together a presentation with props about some topic that we've chosen. And so what happens is we have to do our presentation in front of the whole school. Okay, so Leslie, you got to do your presentation for the whole school, parents, children, and then Shaun, you got to do it too. Now let's imagine that Shaun, you're very well prepared. You got good props. Your parents helped you lay the thing out. It looks fantastic. Plus, you've grown up in a house where storytelling is a kind of rewarded activity, so you're quite comfortable with yourself. So you get up in front of the whole school and you're like, hi, my name is Shaun Cooper and I'm doing my presentation and this is my props and I got this, and you crack a few jokes and everybody loves your presentation. You're going to get a good applause. Nicely done, Shaun. Now, Leslie, you know, he did the best he could, right? You know, maybe his dad was out somewhere and not helping with the props, so his props don't look, but you know, it doesn't matter, he's still working at it. But the other problem is that in his house, storytelling, he was always told, think before you speak. And so he's a little more shy, and he's not very comfortable, and he stands up in front of the whole school and he's like, and he's stuttering and he's stammering and he even blushes and then he cries but he gets through it though. What kind of applause does he get? 10 times. 10 times the applause. What kind of hugs does he get? 10 times. What kind of love does he get? 10 times. What kind of sympathy does he get from all the teachers? Because it was so hard for him. And what does Shaun learn from this? When I make this look easy, I don't get the same level of reward as Leslie does. And what does every kid in the audience learn from this? The harder I make stuff look, the better reward I'm going to get. And you all went to school for 12 years of that. 12 years where we rewarded the person who appeared to put in the most effort. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but I'm saying we need to be conscious of conditioning our children to make life look harder than it really is. And now you got people going to the yoga class, and they go to the yoga class and they're going into a stretch, right? They go into the stretch. Okay, go into the stretch. And they're trying to go in and they're trying to do tree pose. They got their foot up and then their face is like this. What is this? This is an unconscious communication to try to prove to the trainer how hard they're working. That's what it is. It's an unconscious communication of, okay, please don't make me stretch any further, or look how hard I'm working on this pose so that you can give me more praise. You want to do yoga properly, you keep a nice serene look on your face, no matter how intense the stretch is that you're doing. You don't communicate your pain and strife and effort on your face because you're not looking for false praise. But we do all the time.
I think that it's so interesting. I mean, that's I guess the action is driven by a different motive, right? When we're looking at it that way, right? We're not actually looking to, like in your yoga example, we're not actually looking to perform the stretch as it's supposed to be performed, right? We're looking for that validation somehow. I sort of get reminiscent.
And we're not looking for the validation. We're not looking for the validation in the stretch. We're looking for validation in the effort.
Yeah.
You know, I used to be so terrified of public speaking. I mean, like vomiting, terrified of public speaking. And so I got over that. And then I started teaching other people how to do that years and years and years ago. And so one day I'm actually teaching business in Oslo, Norway. And I start talking about marketing and the power of public speaking for marketing. And this one woman, she is so uncomfortable about what I'm saying that she starts like sliding under her table because she just doesn't even like that I'm talking about public speaking. Like, it's not a public speaking workshop. I'm just incidentally talking about the power of public speaking to magnify your business. That's it. And I'm talking about how powerful it is. And she's cringing. And then I asked this question: how many of you are excited right now about public speaking? And it was like 2%. How many of you can do it, but you're a little nervous? How many of you can do it, but you're very, very nervous? And how many of you are absolutely terrified? Well, this girl's so terrified, she didn't raise her hand for any of the options. None of the options, because she was terrified that if she raised her hand for any of the options, that I might make her come up on stage and do it. But you see, what she didn't know is I know what I'm doing. And when I see that somebody doesn't raise their hands, they're the one who need my help the most. And so I did make her come up on stage with me. And I worked with her for about 25 minutes, and she completely let go of her fear of public speaking, totally done. And then she became a public speaker, speaking about mindfulness and other things. And one day she sends me a video, and the video is her doing a great talk. And she does a fabulous talk, fabulous, wonderful talk, well delivered, good stories, good posture, everything was good. And she gets a standing ovation. But then during the standing ovation, she does this. She goes, and I was like, why did you do that? And I'll tell you the problem. It may seem to you like not a big thing that she did that, but here's what's going on. That's her body asking for more positive feedback than she deserves. Do you understand that if she didn't do that, she's just getting this applause, right? But when she does that, she shows everybody how hard it was for her. And now people are going to come up to her and they're going to go, oh, but you were so fantastic. There was nothing for you to be afraid of. Oh, you were amazing. But here's the problem. And this is huge in life. What I'm about to say is huge. If you act like something is harder than it is, if you act like you're afraid, if you display your nerves, if you put this on your face, you go, oh, it was so hard for me, and then you get praise, you will not believe any of it, because you will know that you solicited it fake. You solicited it dishonestly. So you see what happens is somebody shows how nervous they are when they're speaking. Then now people come and go, oh my, but you were so good. And they're like, you're just saying that because you know how nervous I was. And so this whole game that we've been taught that we should make things look harder than they really are is trapping us, because we make it look harder than it really is. Then people come along and tell us what a great job we did, but we know it wasn't that hard. And so we don't believe them. So we don't build our self-esteem. We don't build our confidence. And then we do it again the next time. I think what we should do is go out there and try to make shit look easier than it really was.
And you are, you're touching a lot of nerves for me in a good way, because I think I spent like before this year, the last 5 years being like, man, I'm so busy. Like whenever someone asked me, it was like, oh, it's busy. It's flat out. It's busy. Then I was like, what does that even mean? Like, why should anyone care about that? And the fact is, I never thought about what you just said, which was then when people would be like, oh, but you're working so hard, you know, you're doing such a good job. I never ever believed it. because it was bullshit.
Yep. You were playing a victim to your own busyness, trying to solicit praise for, and that meant that even if you weren't busy, you would have manufactured busyness when you didn't have it.
Yeah. Like just busy work.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing.
I remember that we had that. You guys are probably a bit young for this, but when email first came along, it was like, this is how we were with email. Do I have email? Do I have email? Oh my God, I got an email. Like we loved getting email. And then we went from, oh my God, I got an email to, oh my God, I've got so much email. And then the email wars began. It was like, I have over 200 unread emails in my box. You have 200, I have 647. No, but I have 8,000 emails in my box. And people like get into this, like this martyrdom, right? About 4 or 5 years ago, I got out. I just stopped doing email. Like very few people have an email address for me. You guys don't. I just don't do that. Like very few. But you know what? Now people they're at the dinner table going, oh, I got like 4,000 unread emails. And I go, I have 2. That's the new competition. I have the new competition is I'm less busy and I have less emails than you. That's what I'm competing on.
Yeah. It sort of reminds me of the general culture that we're in now with I don't think it's representative in social media and how people would sort of feel behind, the mask that they continually put on a day-to-day basis, right? And the sort of false praise that they're getting. And like you said, behind closed doors, I'm sure they know there's like many memes and things like this about it, where, they might have a smiley face or beautiful looking body or whatever it is. And then behind closed doors, it's very sad and unexpressive because it is unfulfilling and isn't truly authentic.
Oh yeah, but don't think it's only in that direction, because now the new thing is to come out with your full authenticity and talk about your depression. And now all these people jump on and go, oh, but you're so amazing and you're so vivacious and you've got all this. And now you're getting rewarded for playing the victim on social media. Yeah. And now, because the only metrics that matter are, did I get likes? Did I get shares? Did I get this? Did I get that? So all we do is talk about the very best things about our life and the very worst things about our life, because that's where we get all the feedback. And again, here we are, all these pleasure traps. One of the things I'm working on a book at the moment, and one of the things one of the chapters is called pleasure fasting. And it's like and maybe you've heard a little bit about this concept of dopamine fasting, but it's a similar idea. But the idea is like, listen, if you eat sugar all the time, then things with sugar in them start tasting less and less sweet because your taste buds calibrate, right? But if you go off sugar for like 2 weeks and then you eat a piece of broccoli, you go, holy crap, it's like candy, it's so sweet, because you recalibrated your pleasure system, right? And so one of the things that we recommend is that people take occasional pleasure fasts to recalibrate their because your pleasures and your emotions are kind of like your internal GPS designed to navigate you through life. Only our system is way out of date. And so every now and again, we got to go on a pleasure fast, really be conscious to be not chasing pleasure all the time, for 2 reasons, because it can help us get back to our true north. And the other one is that frankly, if you indulge in pleasure over and over again, it just becomes less and less pleasurable.
Totally.
And then you need to indulge in greater intensities of it. And then it becomes less intense and less pleasurable. And then you have to increase the intensity further. And now you got guys out there that are so turned on by porn that they're not interested in a real live woman. It's like, it's insane. So we really need to be careful about the constant pursuit of pleasure with no thought to the consequence.
So Eric, I want to ask you, how in this environment, like what are some ways that you suggest people do this? Like in terms of, because with all of the temptation, everything around us and the environment, how do people do this?
All right. Well, there are a number of, we could do a series on this conversation. Okay, let me back up for a minute. I'll give you kind of the organizing principle, because that'll help more. If you got that and no strategies, at least you've got a starting place, and then we can maybe get into some tactics. But in conservation, there's a term, and it's called rewilding. And the way rewilding works is you take a look at, say, a section of America that used to have, say, bison and zebras and stuff like that in it before humans came and wiped them out. And so you start reintroducing those animals into that area, and you rewild the area, which of course potentially has the impact of returning some semblance of balance to the ecosystems there. One of the very best examples of this ever is Yellowstone National Park. Yellowstone National Park wiped out all of their wolves between about 1915 and 1926. They were gone. And so there are no wolves there. And then for many years, people petitioned and said, we really should put the wolves back. And like, no, because they devastate everything. They devastate the coyotes, they devastate the foxes, and so on. And then finally, as I understand the story, a wolf walked from Canada. They know this because it had a radio tag on, to Yellowstone. And a couple of other wolves showed up. And the next thing you know, they're like, what the hell? We have to repopulate. And so they put about 30 or so wolves back into Yellowstone. Now, initially, the wolves killed about twice as many elk as they predicted, and they were a bit worried about that. But then a few funny things happened. The one is that the elk used to eat all the willow trees before they would even get to grow. And the willow trees are what the beavers used to make dams. So the beaver population is suffering. But now that the elk couldn't go down onto the river flats and eat all the willow trees started growing, and the beavers could build better dams. And so then there were 10 beaver colonies when there used to only be one. In the meantime, the coyote population just completely blossomed, because when wolves kill something, they don't eat all of it, and they leave a bunch for the coyotes to scavenge. And then also the grizzly bears were getting it. And all of this was so impactful that it actually changed the shapes of the rivers in Yellowstone National Park. And the way that happened is that a lot of the grazing animals like elk would eat along the riverbanks, and they would eat all the vegetation away, which would weaken the riverbank, which would make the rivers wider and wider and wider and wider, which means that less fish can live in them because they don't have depth anymore. And all of a sudden now, the wolves are hunting the elks right there at the riverbank. So the elks are going, hell no, man, I got to go back up into the forest. And now the riverbanks are getting stronger. And so why am I saying all this? Because I believe that rewilding is something that we should be doing for our bodies, our diet, our exercise, and our emotions. And so that's the organizing principle that I suggest we work with, is that in the same way that we can cause, I think it's called an atrophic cascade, but in the same way that by introducing this apex predator back into Yellowstone, we can completely and radically improve the ecological conditions there. We should be looking for those same keystone influences in our own lives. So from there, we can attack any number of different areas. But let's talk about food, for example. Here we are living in the safest times in the history of ever, and yet more people are on psychotropic, more people are taking psychiatric medicine now than ever in history. Yet, even though we live in the safest times, well, what's going on? Well, a huge part of that is that the human population is overfed energy and stimulants and underfed nutrition. So that means you've got a bunch of people that literally feel like they're starving to death while being overstimulated. In other words, we're living in a zombie apocalypse. The average person walking around the streets of America is a zombie. They are overstimulated by sugar and caffeine and stimulants, and they're undernourished. So they're basically walking around looking for brains to eat. Of course, I'm kidding, but you understand kind of the idea here is that if we can now rewild somebody's diet, which is the work that we do at WILDFIT, if we can rewild somebody's diet and get them into a healthier psychology about food so that they have a real sense of food freedom, they can eat properly, and they're well educated, then you know what? Yeah, sure, they lose weight, they end their inflammation, they reverse their type 2 diabetes, all of that happens. But more importantly, they're happy. They become happy. Their depression goes away, their anxiety goes away, because a huge amount of that depression and anxiety is from the mismatch of being overstimulated and starving to death all at the same time. Having too much energy and not enough nutrients is dangerous. So one of the very first things we can do is rewild our relationship with food and exercise. Exercise, by the way, I mean, look at a brain scan of somebody, like, I hope you guys will do this when we're done. I will. When we're done with this podcast, get off your ass. For those of you who are listening, if you're not walking around while you listen to this podcast, I don't know what you're thinking. I don't listen to podcasts sitting on my ass. I walk around and listen to them. So when the three of us are done recording this, I demand that you get up and walk around, because you know why? I've seen the brain scans of somebody who's been sitting for 30 minutes. And you know what? It's like the power's gone. There's nothing going on in there. It's empty. But the minute that person walks around and stretches and gets some fresh air and does some walking for 20 minutes, it's like a firework display in there. And so movement is really absolutely key. But we live in the world today where most of our needs can be met from one couch. You can quite literally sit on a couch, dial up any emotional experience you want from Netflix, Uber up yourself whatever nutritional garbage you want to do, and do no movement whatsoever. And again, we wonder why we're depressed. So I could keep going, but I think the organizing principle is rewild yourself. And then a great place to start is nutrition. And another great place to start is with proper movement of the body. And if you do the best you can to duplicate those things with our natural world, your life experience is radically improved.
Yeah. And I think like you said, those things are really just foundational, and like the I guess the things that can stem from that are almost infinite in terms of where we can go, in terms of, because if you have a stable base and foundation to go from, mentally, spiritually, anything that can reveal so much for you in your life. And like you said, you mentioned that finding your true north, that's something that hits hard for Shaun and I, because we have actually a program that's called True North, but exactly that, right? If you don't have a stable and clean foundation to go from, then how do you expect to excel, let alone, even just operate at a decent level? But those things, like you said, they're simply foundational. There's nothing too special about them, really, right? We're just taking foundational principles of, living as we should, and not, eating food products, eating food instead, and simply moving as our bodies were given to us and gifted to us to do.
And I obviously I pick on food because I've had a big impact in that area, and it's been a big part of my life for the last 20 some odd years, 30 years. But it spills over in everything. Take a look at emotions. Like most people, if you ask them, they can give you a list of bad emotions and good emotions. And the way they're really doing that is the good emotions are the ones they like to experience, and the bad emotions are the ones they don't like to experience. But here's the problem: is that when we have a bad emotion, well, when we think of it as bad, then we want to avoid it, which means we don't want to process it, which means we don't want to learn from it. So what do? We figure out a way to distract ourselves. So we can Netflix ourselves away from it. We can drug ourselves away from it. We can eat ourselves away. We distract ourselves from the negative emotion. But that negative emotion is one of your GPS satellites. That negative emotion is letting you know that you're off track in some way. And so if you don't dive into that negative emotion and learn from it, then you are going to become dysfunctional. It's not, those negative emotions are highly important. Take a look at an emotion like jealousy. Most people regard jealousy as a negative emotion. I don't see it as a negative emotion. I just see it as telling me something. And by the way, let's take a look. If somebody is messed up with their nutrition, right? Let's say they're overstimulated and underfed, which means they have a general sense of lack. It means they generally feel like they're dying. And now their relationship gets threatened by jealousy, then they're going to overreact with their jealousy because they're already screwed, right? Mm. But now somebody gets themselves physically into balance. They're eating well, they're exercising well, and they're going to have a slightly better experience with their own emotions. So now we can take a look at and understand what jealousy really is. Jealousy and mistrust are not the same thing. They're not the same thing. And I often think about this. You're walking down the sidewalk, say a man and a woman are walking down the sidewalk, say they're in a relationship, married or dating or whatever, and say the guy checks out a cute girl on the other side of the street. If his wife or girlfriend kind of gives him an elbow and says, hey, don't do that, what she's really saying is, I don't want any competition. I don't want to work any harder than I am right now. So please don't look over there because I feel insecure. But what she's also saying to him is, oh, and incidentally, do not make testosterone in my presence. Because when he does look at that other girl, it makes him produce testosterone, which makes him feel younger and makes him feel more vital. And the girlfriend could play that right and use that testosterone to her own advantage. So if you begin to recognize, hey, wait a second now, what if we looked at this very differently? What if she walked down the street and saw that situation kind of, jolted him and gave him a little bit of energy? And if she felt insecure at all, then maybe what she should be doing is saying, wow, what am I not living up to that allows me to feel insecure about this? And so now that jealousy can potentially become a signal that some change is needed. I'll give you one more. Shame. People are horribly afraid of shame. They're terrified of shame. The minute they think shame is a one-way road to a dead end. In other words, if you go down that road, you're going to get stuck down there. Well, no. Shame. I mean, first of all, have you ever met somebody who has no shame? They're very unpleasant to be around. They're just not nice to be around. So what you want to have is a comfortable recognition of shame, so that you don't become an asshole, basically, and you don't want to let shame run your life. So you have to walk the line. And I had this is a very almost embarrassing story for me, but I was in a situation a couple of years ago where I was speaking for this organization quite regularly, and there was a general assumption that they were going to have me speak at their next conference. And I kind of planned around that. And I was really looking forward to it because it's a super fun conference to speak at. And then one day I got an email saying, actually, we don't need you to be there. And the little 6-year-old inside me felt insecure, felt rejected, right? Like my ego didn't like it. But I'd made plans. And I was like, Now, if you think about it, there's any number of ways I could have written back to them to try to get myself added to the event. I could have said, well, wait a second now, this topic of the event is this, and I'm talking about that. You don't want to lose that. Or, well, I'm already planning to be in the country, so I'd really appreciate it if I could come. There's any number of answers I could have sent, but instead, I laid a guilt trip. I just wrote them and go, well, we've talked about it before and I've already made plans, you know, and I hit send. And then this shame came up in me, this shame. I was like, who communicates like that? That's so disgusting. And of course, what I wanted to do immediately was just go watch TV or some shit. Like, I was like, I don't even want to think about this anymore. But instead what I did was I went into the shame all the way and I examined it and I hated it. It was like awful. It was like eating the most disgusting thing in the world. I hated the process. But the only answer that came out the other end of the shame was to write a message to the two people I'd written to and apologize to them for being manipulative and saying, guys, I was a little hurt. And please understand this is entirely my responsibility. And thank you for all the opportunities you've given me so far. Both of them wrote back to me and said, wow, that was incredible. They weren't even worried about the first email, but I was. And so I'm trying to say there are no bad emotions. Every single emotion is a life coach trying to steer you right. Some of them are rewarding you and some of them are nudging you.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's a great, I guess, a great place to leave off the conversation and something for people to chew on, because it's probably the most difficult thing for people to actually do and confront on a daily basis. But, it is probably the most revelatory to find a place to, express yourself and, really delve deep into what the emotions are telling you, use them as a mirror, as Eric said. Very important thing to not, suppress and be able to express yourself, whatever it is. And emotions, they're there, like Eric said, to point us in the right direction. But, I really want to thank you for your time today, Eric. Really gracious. And, I've followed you for a long time. So for me personally, it was a great treat. I'd love for you to share with our audience where the people can find you.
Sure. If you are interested in sort of rewilding your body, then go and check out getwildfit.com, where you can learn about food psychology and nutrition. If you really want to get good at like storytelling and overcoming any fear of public speaking, check out speakernation.com. And on a personal basis, I manage my own Instagram and I do my very best to answer people's questions when they write to me. And so if you come and find me, just my name at Eric Edmeades on Instagram, I am approachable and reachable right there.
Yeah, thank you. We'll put all that into the show notes and so people can find you easily, mate. Shaun, where can people find you, mate?
Yeah, easiest place to find me is on Instagram. So it's just Shaun_Coop, SHAUN_COOP. And people can also find us at true_north.co. That's a place where you can connect with Les and myself too. And Les, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on my website, findingspace.co. All my latest programs and meditation programs, all that sort of thing is all up there. So you can send me a message on there. Facebook and Instagram, it's at findingspace.co as well.
And Eric, I just want to take the opportunity to thank you as well for today. Man, we could have talked for like 5 hours and I would have been more than happy to, if you hadn't smacked us up to get moving so our brain doesn't turn off. But I will be definitely making some, getting moving after this. And I know that people who listen to this will be getting a lot out of the conversation. It's going to peak a lot for them mentally. And I hope that it helps them to see things from a different perspective. That's really why we do this. And I'm sure they will today. So if you're listening to this, you made it this far, please share it with one other person. That's how we grow the podcast. And please share out all of Eric's good work. And until next time, thanks so much.
See you guys.
Thanks, guys.